On the crisp evening of October 7th, 1988, the town of Fremont, Iowa, gathered inside the gymnasium of Westcott Middle School for its annual fall play. The air was full of anticipation, parents chatting in folding chairs while students waited nervously backstage. For the students, it was a highlight of the semester. For 13-year-old Ellie Brown, it was her very first performance. Ellie played a minor character, a supporting role with only a few lines. But to her, it was everything. Her mother had curled her hair that afternoon, and she wore her costume proudly. A cotton dress, white stage shoes, and a delicate flower clip pinned above her right ear. Several friends said she seemed unusually quiet that day, like she was thinking hard about something beyond the performance. The play ended around 8:40 p.m. As the crowd clapped and parents gathered in the front lobby, cast members began filing out of the dressing rooms, laughing and hugging family members. But Ellie never emerged. By 9:15, her parents began to worry. They checked the restroom, the stage, the hallway near the lockers. Nothing. Her backpack was missing from the dressing room, and none of the other girls recalled seeing her after curtain call. A few said she left in a hurry. One girl, Maria Thomas, told a teacher she'd seen Ellie looking into an open locker at the end of the back hallway. She hadn't thought much of it. She assumed Ellie had gone to meet someone, but no one had seen her since. The school was searched that night. Teachers and staff walked every corridor. The sheriff's office was called in by 10 p.m. The building was sealed and a full search began, classrooms, basement, gym, storage, even the roof. No trace. Over the next days, volunteers combed nearby streets, fields, and wooded patches. Her face appeared on flyers, the local news, even in Des Moines. But nothing emerged. No sightings. No messages. Ellie had vanished, without signs of foul play or forced entry. The investigation eventually slowed. Some speculated she had run away. Others believed something had happened within the school that night, something hidden. Her locker was examined. Her classmates questioned repeatedly, and yet no firm lead surfaced. Ellie's parents moved away 3 years later. The town tried to move on, but the memory lingered. Teachers would sometimes pause near locker number 108, where Ellie had last been seen, and feel something strange. A draft, a coldness, or perhaps it was just a memory of what had gone unanswered for so long. Then, in the summer of 2013, Westcott Middle School underwent long overdue renovations. The metal lockers, many of which had rusted with age, were scheduled for removal. The job was assigned to Ralph Higgins, a quiet man in his 60s who had worked at the school since 1982. He knew every pipe, vent, and corridor by heart, and when he reached locker 108, he paused. It looked normal, paint chipped, door loose on its hinges. But when he removed the unit from the wall, he noticed something odd. Behind it was a wooden panel, rough, out of place, as if it had been added much later, using cheaper materials. The surface was covered in dust, but the nails had been replaced more recently. Ralph tapped it, hollow, using a flathead screwdriver. He pried the panel away carefully. Behind it, in a narrow cavity between the inner wall and the outer brick, lay a small compartment. And inside that compartment was a faded pink backpack. Ralph didn't touch it. He backed away slowly and called the school office. Within the hour, police arrived and sealed off the hallway. The bag was removed gently and examined. The contents were partially preserved. A spiral notebook with hand-drawn flowers on the cover, a worn pair of white stage shoes with faint scuffs on the toe, and a pencil case full of gel pens, popular in the late 80s. Tucked between the pages of the notebook was a folded scrap of graph paper. On it, drawn in purple ink, was a rough map, a layout of the school's locker corridor, with an X marked behind one of the rows. A small note below the drawing read, "My secret place. Sure." Investigators confirmed the handwriting belonged to Ellie. The shoes matched what she had worn the night of the play. And suddenly, after 25 years, the mystery reopened. There were no bones, no clothing remnants beyond the shoes, no signs of a body ever being in the cavity. But the placement of the bag and the map suggested something that had been missed from the start. Ellie had hidden there on purpose, and for some reason she never came out. Detective Laurel Wynn, now retired but once assigned to the original case, visited the scene days later. She stood in the empty hallway, staring at the exposed wall cavity. "I remember checking these lockers," she said softly, "but not like this. We didn't think to look behind them. We didn't know there was space." She looked down at the map in the evidence bag. "She was here," she whispered, "all this time." But how had no one heard her? Was she trapped? Did she leave again later? Why was only the bag left behind? Theories swirled. Some believed Ellie had gotten stuck, curiosity leading her into a space she couldn't escape. Others wondered if she'd used it as a hiding spot and slipped out later, vanishing by her own design. The lack of remains complicated everything. But her belongings, untouched for 25 years, had waited silently in the dark. And they were speaking now. Detective Laura Wynn stood alone in the school hallway after the crowd had cleared, long after the media crews had packed up their tripods and left. Locker 108 had been removed completely now, exposing the wooden cavity behind it. A quiet, unsettling space no more than 2 feet deep, wedged between drywall and the original brick. The pink backpack and white stage shoes had already been bagged and taken evidence, but the feeling they left behind remained thick in the air. Wynn, now in her 70s, hadn't walked these halls in more than 2 decades. She had long since retired, but the Ellie Brown case had haunted her since the day it was assigned. She'd always believed Ellie had never left the building. Now, standing before this newly discovered hiding place, she knew she had been right. The notebook found inside the bag was full of whimsical, wandering thoughts. Ellie had written about things most 13-year-olds wouldn't bother to notice. Overheard hallway gossip, descriptions of people's shoes, fragments of dreams. But woven through the pages were hints of something more deliberate. She wrote about her favorite sound, the way the air smelled near the janitor's closet, and most often about hiding. The school is loud in the day, but quiet at night. If I sit still, I can hear the pipes talk. Locker 108 is the best one. It has a draft. Maybe that means it breathes. Sometimes I think I disappear when I sit here. When flipped through each page, struck by the strange blend of innocence and intent. This wasn't just a child playing a game. Ellie had been observing, exploring, testing the boundaries of her world in silence. On one of the last pages, Ellie had drawn a small diagram of the back hallway. It showed the locker rows, a side arrow labeled janitor closet, and a scribbled phrase at the bottom. The space is behind it. No one knows it's there, not even them. When underlined that sentence, who did she mean by them? Teachers? Classmates? Or something else entirely? The discovery sparked a renewed investigation. Detective Sam Brewster, assigned to the Fremont Police Department's cold case unit, took over with Wynn acting as consultant. He was only a toddler when Ellie had vanished, but he approached the case with a quiet determination that reminded Wynn of herself years ago. Brewster arranged to scan the entire east corridor of the school using ground-penetrating radar. The aim was to determine whether the locker compartment had any adjoining voids, spaces large enough for a child to enter or move through. The results came back surprising. Behind the wall that once held Locker 108 was a slim vertical shaft that extended upward to the ceiling and downward below the floor, an old ventilation channel from the original 1950s construction that had been sealed at both ends in the late 70s. It had been overlooked for decades. The upper portion led to a locked crawl space near the theater lighting room. The lower end fed into a narrow maintenance chamber near the furnace room in the basement. Both areas had been retrofitted with ductwork over the years, but gaps remained, hidden and forgotten. Brewster and Wynn visited the crawl space first. Inside, among decades of dust and forgotten wiring, they found a single artifact, a torn piece of notebook paper, curled at the edges, wedged between the joists. On it, scrawled in the same purple ink, were the words, "Too many footsteps. Can't tell if they're mine." Wynn held the page carefully, her voice barely a whisper. She was up here. She kept moving. They searched the basement access point next. The maintenance chamber was tight and stale. The air was dry, and the fluorescent lighting flickered overhead. In the corner, where 2 old ducts met, a small gap no more than a foot wide opened behind the wall. It was impossible for an adult to fit through, but just wide enough for a slender child. Inside the cavity, they found scratches on the drywall. Finger length, clumsy, faint, and one more thing, a bobby pin, still holding a wilted plastic flower, one identical to the one Ellie had worn during the play. Wynne sat on the basement floor for several minutes in silence. This wasn't just a place to hide, she said quietly. She was exploring, moving between spaces. Brewster agreed. Maybe the school was a puzzle to her. Maybe she wanted to vanish, just for a little while, and then couldn't get back. But why? And how had no one heard her? Ellie had been last seen at 8:50 p.m. The building was still filled with parents and students at that time. If she had gone behind a locker into the shaft and then moved upward or downward, any noise she made might have been drowned out by the chaos of post-show celebration. Or worse, maybe she had waited deliberately until the halls were empty. Back at the station, Brewster reviewed the old witness statements. One stood out. Maria Thomas, then a fellow seventh grader, had told police she saw Ellie looking into an open locker after play. But in the original file, there was a handwritten note from the interviewing officer that had been overlooked. When asked if Ellie said anything, Maria paused and said, "She told me she had to go listen. The school was about to tell her something." That sentence hadn't been followed up at the time. Now it felt critical. What had Ellie meant? Back at the school, Brewster and Wynne returned to the empty cavity behind locker 108. The renovation team had halted work until the investigation closed. The space was untouched. Wynne knelt beside the exposed wall and placed her hand against the old wood. "The school," she said slowly. She felt like it was talking to her. Brewster looked around the hallway, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Wynne continued, "Some kids, they tune into the world differently. They see patterns where we don't, hear things we ignore. I think Ellie thought she could learn something by hiding." Brewster said nothing. Then his flashlight passed over a faint mark inside the panel. Carved into the old wood, barely visible, were letters. Not written, but scratched, slowly, carefully. Not lost, just listening. It wasn't signed, but there was no doubt who had written it. Ellie Brown hadn't run away. She hadn't been taken. She had gone in, looking for something only she could hear. And for 25 years, she had been silent. Until now, Detective Sam Brewster sat alone in the quiet school hallway that once held locker 108, staring at the exposed cavity like it might blink back at him. The carved message, not lost, just listening, still lingered in his thoughts, looping in a quiet rhythm that he couldn't shake. The words weren't a cry for help. They weren't even frightened. They were calm, intentional, like Ellie Brown had gone to the wall not by mistake, but by design. Back at the station, Brewster re-examined the notebook retrieved from Ellie's backpack. He had read it already, but something kept pulling him back. Near the middle of the spiral-bound pages, in between doodles and rambling sentences, he spotted a short list, almost like a game. Things I can hear if I'm really still. The water pipes clicking. The elevator motor, even when it's off. The lights humming when they think no one's here. My own footsteps, but from far away. The locker doors breathing. The last line sent a chill through him. Locker doors breathing? He flipped further. Another passage caught his eye. The space behind 108 feels like it used to be part of something. Like it forgot what it was doing. I think it waits for me. This wasn't imagination. It wasn't fiction. Ellie believed the school had a rhythm, a voice she could tune into. And somehow, that voice had led her through hidden corridors, between vent shafts and maintenance chambers, and into places no one else even remembered existed. Brewster met again with Ralph Higgins, the janitor who had first discovered the hidden panel. Ralph, weather but sharp, remembered strange things from back then. There were noises in that hall at night, he said over coffee. Sometimes after everyone left, I'd hear faint knocking or a door creaking. I'd check, of course, but I always figured it was just the building settling. What about the ventilation shaft? Brewster asked. Ralph nodded slowly. Back when I started here, that shaft went all the way to the roof. It was part of the old air system. Sealed off sometime in the late 70s. We just covered the grates and forgot about it. Could someone move through it? A kid? Probably. It was tight, but passable. Brewster ran his hand over his chin. Then why didn't anyone find her? Ralph looked away. Because we weren't listening for the right things. Those words stayed with him. Later that week, ground-penetrating radar revealed something else. A crawl space above the lighting rig in the auditorium. The cavity, unreachable without removing ceiling panels, had not been inspected in years. Construction blueprints marked it as non-functional. Brewster received permission to open it. The air was dry and dusty, and the wooden panel gave way with a sharp crack. A narrow crawl space unfolded, coated in insulation and shadows. And in the back, half covered by dust, lay a small cloth pouch. Inside were 3 objects: a folded piece of paper, a polished stone shaped like a tear, and a second spiral notebook, smaller, with a single name on the inside cover, L.E.B. Brewster's heart thudded. He opened the notebook carefully. The first entry read, "If you're reading this, then I didn't make it back. Or I did, and no one recognized me. Either way, I guess you listened. That matters." He kept reading. "I don't know how to explain it, but the school is alive. Not in a scary way. More like aware. Some places inside it remember more than others. When I sit in certain corners, I can feel time thin out, like pages in a book, but folded. It started near 108, but it spread. There were sketches, vents, wall gaps, timetables, and one chilling phrase. When the hallway is empty and the last bell rings, there's a breath. You can feel it if you stand still. That's when it opens." Open what? The notebook didn't say, but the last page bore only one line. "If the school speaks to you too, please listen back." Not everyone hears it, but it's lonely when no one tries. Brewster closed the notebook, stunned. This wasn't a case of entrapment. Ellie had ventured deeper, drawn into something no adult had ever noticed or bothered to believe. To her, the building had been more than bricks and lockers. It was a presence, a companion, and somewhere along the way, it had absorbed her story. When reviewed the findings that evening, her voice was quiet, somber. She wasn't lost, she said. She was learning, exploring, hiding in plain sight. But what happened to her? Brewster asked. She didn't vanish into thin air. No, Wynne replied, but maybe she stepped sideways, into places no one else saw. She found gaps between the ordinary. Brewster stared down at the notebook. Do you think she got out? Wynne didn't answer right away. Then maybe she found something better than out. The school, now nearly 70 years old, holds on to echoes. Students walk past locker 108 without knowing what once rested behind it. The wall has been sealed, the hallway repainted, but the maintenance team still hears soft clicks at night, the occasional creak. Once, during a late rehearsal, a teacher swore she heard humming near the auditorium ceiling, faint, melodic, and gone in seconds. The items Ellie left behind, the backpack, the shoes, the first notebook, are now stored in a climate-controlled archive in Fremont's small municipal museum. But the second notebook, the one found above the auditorium, sits locked in a police evidence locker, marked, pending further review. On a small tag clipped to the front is a typed quote from one of Ellie's final entries. Some places in the school remember, so I'm going to remember with them. What happened to Ellie Brown may never be fully understood. No body was ever found. No eyewitnesses came forward. And no definitive proof explains how she entered those hidden spaces or where she went after. But one thing is certain. She wasn't trying to disappear. She was trying to listen. And now, finally, someone is listening back. Autumn returned to Fremont in shades of amber and gray, and with it came renewed interest in a story most had buried long ago. News of the rediscovered notebooks, the secret compartments, and Ellie Brown's mysterious map had begun to circulate beyond the small town. Reporters visited Westcott Middle School. Former classmates gave interviews. And once again, the name Ellie Brown was spoken in whispers through the halls she had once quietly wandered. Detective Sam Brewster, still reeling from the strange insights the second notebook had revealed, requested access to the school's original architectural records. He believed the building held more than outdated blueprints. He was looking for design anomalies, hidden voids, sealed rooms, forgotten stairwells, anything that might support Ellie's claims of spaces that breathe. The blueprints told a curious story. Westcott Middle had been built in 1951, during a post-war expansion of Fremont's public schools. But unlike most school buildings from that era, Westcott was designed with multiple non-standard features, ventilation tunnels larger than necessary, duplicate utility paths, and crawl spaces that didn't lead to any functioning system. Most peculiar of all, a service stairwell that appeared on the 1951 plan, but was absent by the time the 1975 update was filed. It had led from the basement maintenance wing to a small, hexagonal chamber behind the auditorium stage. No such chamber currently existed. Brewster brought this finding to Laurel Wynn, whose eyes narrowed as she traced the faded pencil lines of the original blueprint. "That's not a maintenance route," she murmured. "That's a transition." "A what?" In old architectural parlance, transitions were liminal zones, buffer spaces, rarely used now, but sometimes installed in post-war buildings to divide utilities, acoustics, or even energy flow. "And you think Ellie found it?" Wynn nodded. "Or it found her." They returned to the school the following evening, after hours, with permission to access the basement's sealed sections. Brewster led the way with a floor plan in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Behind a row of rusted utility cabinets, they found it, a cinder block wall with mismatched mortar and a discolored pipe running straight through. It was filled in, Brewster said. They walled over the stairwell. When scanned the ceiling, looked for gaps. Behind an old electrical conduit, a horizontal seam was just barely visible. It matched the dimensions of the missing stairwell. Brewster called for assistance. Within hours, a crew had removed the panel and begun excavating the block passage. What they revealed was startling. A narrow, spiraling stairwell made of poured concrete, caked in dust and spider webs, descending into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended. The space was silent, still untouched. At the base of the stairs was a door, metal, unmarked, its paint flaking with age. Behind it, the chamber, hexagonal, no windows, no furnishings, just smooth concrete walls and a small wooden bench fixed into one corner, and on the bench, a bundle wrapped in a faded school sweater. Inside, a third notebook. The first page read, "If I sit here long enough, I stop remembering where I started." It was Ellie's handwriting. The notebook was different from the others. Shorter entries, fractured thoughts, repetitive phrases, sketches that looped in on themselves, circles within circles, staircases that spiraled endlessly. The space remembers me. It folds around the quiet. I think I've become part of it. I am not gone. I am not gone. I am not gone. They walk the halls when no one's looking. Shadows that keep the secrets. Wynn ran her fingers over the last page. No signature. Just a final sentence. I am the breath in the wall. The notebook was dated October 14th, 1988. Exactly 1 week after Ellie's disappearance. But how had it gotten there? Who wrapped it? Why had no one found this room? Brewster questioned the construction team responsible for the 1975 renovations. Only one former worker, now in his 80s, could be located. When shown a photo of the stairwell, he grew visibly uncomfortable. "They told us not to ask about that room," he said. "We were ordered to wall it off. No wiring, no pipes, just seal it." "Who gave that order?" Brewster asked. The man shook his head. "Didn't come from the school. Some out-of-town official. Said it wasn't used and not to disturb it." Wynn's brow furrowed. "Then what was it doing in a middle school?" The man hesitated, then whispered. "They said it was designed to keep things in, not out." Later that night, Brewster sat in his office, staring at all three of Ellie's notebooks laid side by side. A portrait emerged, not of a lost child, but of someone who had slipped between cracks. Not by accident, by attention. Ellie had noticed what others ignored. She listened to what the school had forgotten how to say. She hadn't disappeared. She had relocated. And in some quiet, inexplicable way, she was still present. Over the following days, teachers at Westcott began to report strange sensations in the old hallways. Small shifts in temperature, lights flickering in patterns, distant footsteps when the building was empty. One night, the school librarian left her phone, recording overnight near locker 108. In the morning, she reviewed the footage. No movement, no figures. But at 2:13 a.m., faintly, came a voice, small and distant. "I'm still listening." The audio was inconclusive. The district refused further testing. The school sealed the stairwell again. But Brewster kept the notebooks. And in his private notes, he began a new file. He labeled it Residual Presence. E.B. Ellie's parents were contacted. They declined to return to Fremont, but requested scans of their daughter's handwriting. Her mother later sent a letter saying, "We always felt she was near, not in a ghostly way, just close, like a thought you can't quite finish. I think she found something we never could." Ellie Brown's case remains officially open. No remains were recovered, no sightings confirmed. But those who walk the halls of Westcott Middle now do so a little slower, a little more carefully. Some swear the air near locker 108 feels just a few degrees colder. And those who've heard the whispers say it best. Ellie didn't get lost. She went somewhere the rest of us forgot how to follow. The notebooks have been read and reread. The sealed stairwell behind the wall had been opened, explored, and closed again. And still, Detective Sam Brewster felt like the real story was just beginning. Ellie Brown had not simply vanished. She had documented her path, left clues and sketches, and written sentences that sounded more like riddles and reflections. In her final notebook, found wrapped inside the old-school sweater on the bench deep beneath Westcott Middle School, Ellie wrote, "I am the breath in the wall." That line echoed through Brewster's mind as he stood once more in the hexagonal chamber, now cold and silent. He'd returned with forensic acoustics expert from Des Moines, a man named Daniel Krell, who specialized in microsound mapping, using sensitive equipment to detect structural resonance and trace the movement of air within buildings. The theory was simple. If Ellie had moved through these forgotten passages, maybe her presence had left a trail, not physically, but acoustically. Buildings, Krell explained, can remember frequencies, especially older ones with complex ductwork and dense materials. When pressure changes or vibrations shift the air subtly, those patterns can linger. Krell's team spent 3 days mapping the corridor outside the sealed stairwell, the locker cavity, and the crawl space above the auditorium. What they found was startling. All 3 locations produced faint, irregular tones, barely audible to human ears, but present. The frequencies weren't consistent, but they weren't random either. They pulsed, they looped, they moved between places. Most bizarrely, one sequence occurred at precisely 2:13 a.m. each night. The tone would rise slightly, then fall, followed by silence. The same time a librarian had captured the whisper, "I'm still listening." Krell called it a residual harmonic. Brewster called it something else. A signal. Back at the station, Brewster compiled all Ellie's drawings. She'd sketched not just hallways and ducts, but something more abstract. Loops and curves, arrows folding back on themselves, tunnels that overlapped in impossible ways. One drawing in particular stood out. It showed a map of the school's floor plan from above, but bent like it had been folded in on itself. In the center was a star, and beside it, in Ellie's familiar handwriting, the place where things wait to be remembered. He marked the location on the real map. It sat between the gymnasium and the science wing, in a patch of wall long believed to be structural filler. No doors, no windows, just support beams and plaster. Until now, Brewster returned to the school with permission from the district to scan the wall. Krell's equipment confirmed a cavity, a room, maybe 6 feet wide, completely sealed. No ductwork entered or exited. No known access point. He asked the school to let him open it. They refused. But 2 nights later, Brewster returned alone, quietly unlocking the side entrance with a spare key provided by Principal Davies, who had grown up in Fremont and remembered Ellie's face from old photos. By flashlight, Brewster made his way to the blank section of wall. With gloved hands and a crowbar, he carefully removed a portion of the drywall. Beneath it was a layer of ancient plaster and brick, sealed decades ago. He chipped through, and behind the wall, in perfect stillness, was a room. No light, no furniture, no signs of function, just a space suspended in silence. And in the center, resting on the floor, was a fourth notebook. He lifted it slowly. The cover was cracked from age, but the first page was clear. I don't think time works here. The entries were sparse, scattered across the pages like fragments of a dream. The space folds like paper. I walked one way and came back a different way. I saw my locker from behind the wall. I watched them open it. I was right there. I thought I would be scared, but it's peaceful, like being inside a memory that hasn't happened yet. The last page held no words, just a drawing, a silhouette of a girl sitting cross-legged in a small square space. No face, no background, just a still figure drawn in pencil. And around her, faintly sketched in looping lines, were walls bending inward like fabric. Brewster stared at it for a long time. Ellie had documented her experience in a language only she seemed to understand, part observation, part intuition. She hadn't been fleeing danger. She hadn't been hiding in fear. She had found something few ever do, a threshold, one that exists not in geography, but in perception, in forgotten corners and whispered frequencies. Brewster sealed the wall again, leaving the space as it was. The fourth notebook he kept with the others, now stored in an evidence archive labeled simply, Ellie Brown 4. In the months that followed, Westcott Middle School quietly retired Locker 108. A commemorative plaque was installed in the hallway, not declaring tragedy, but remembering curiosity. It read, "She listened where no one else did." Students walk past it every day. Some pause, some don't, but stories persist. Teachers report hallway lights flickering briefly at exactly 2:13 a.m., even when the building is empty. One janitor swears he heard footsteps one night that followed just behind him before vanishing at the stairwell. A science teacher once found a note slipped beneath her door after class, written in purple ink. Sometimes you find things when you stop looking. It was unsigned. For her part, Laura Wynne finally found a closure she had been denied for 25 years. She didn't need a body, or a confession, or even a clean explanation. Ellie had spoken, and someone had finally listened. Today, Fremont remembers Ellie not as a missing girl, but as something else. An explorer of the unnoticed, a traveler of quiet spaces, a listener to a language most of us have forgotten. And sometimes, when the air is still, when the hall is quiet, and when the clocks read exactly 2:13, some say you can hear a breath in the wall, waiting, remembering.